Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. Things are starting to get good as we have our first ranked versus ranked matchup of the postseason between number 21 Oklahoma State and number 18 Miami in the Cheez-It Bowl. And I'll tell you guys, this feels like a matchup between two very, very even teams. So difficult to pick a winner in this one. But that, of course, is the goal of this video. Someone's got to win, and we're going to let you know who it is. We're going to break down both sides of the ball, the keys to the game, and who we have winning this Cheez-It Bowl, a win that would be huge for both teams going into 2021. So before we dive into the deep numbers here, the first thing you want to look at is how both Oklahoma State and Miami ended their seasons. And they ended in the most opposite ways possible. Oklahoma State finished the year with a 42-3 blowout win over Baylor. Miami ended their season with a 62-26 blowout loss at home to North Carolina, where they allowed 778 yards, including 554 rushing yards, and that loss ultimately keeping them out of the Orange Bowl, keeping them out of a New Year's Six bowl game. North Carolina, as we know, got that spot. Will be facing off against Texas A&M. So, not the way you want to end a season, which is why this game is so important for the Hurricanes, to try to end on a high note and try to carry a little bit of momentum into what will be a big 2021 season for Manny Diaz. So let's go ahead and take a look at the offense here. Let's start with Oklahoma State, the designated road team, if you will, in this Cheez-It Bowl. The Cowboys will be without their star running back in Chuba Hubbard, who a few weeks ago decided to opt out for the remainder of the season. So he didn't opt out just for this bowl game. He opted out a few weeks ago, and we expected that. It was a shock to see him come back this year. Many thought he'd take off the NFL after 2019. He came back and had a mediocre season, 625 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. The guys behind him, though, have really stepped up, and that's the storyline you want to watch here. Chuba Hubbard's not playing. He's been mediocre all year. What's the run game going to look like, not just in this bowl game, but the future for Oklahoma State? You got Desmond Jackson, who's rushed for over 500 yards this year. You've got L.D. Brown, who's rushed for 395 yards this year as well. And they've helped maintain those solid rushing numbers for Oklahoma State. They're averaging 194.7 rushing yards per game this year. That's a very, very good number. Outside of the run game, which is something you would expect the Cowboys to try to lean on a little bit, you've got a dynamic duo between Spencer Sanders, the quarterback, and Tylan Wallace at wide receiver, one of the best wide receivers in the Big 12, and will certainly be a big steal in this upcoming NFL draft. Sanders has thrown for over 1,700 yards this season, 10 touchdowns, but he has thrown 8 interceptions. Now, granted, his stats could be a little bit better, maybe worse, had he not missed a few games earlier in the year. But since he's come back, he's been mediocre. A little bit above average maybe, but nothing spectacular. The interceptions is what's concerned me. 8 interceptions on the year. Sanders has thrown 5 of those in his last 4 games. He's thrown at least 1 interception in his last 4 games, and that is not good going up against a stingy Miami defense that we'll talk on in a little bit. Tylan Wallace, 877 yards receiving on the year, 6 touchdowns. So 60% of Sanders' touchdowns have gone to Tylan Wallace. I know you've got Shane Illingsworth, who maybe has thrown a few to Tylan Wallace as well, but he's the primary receiver, and we know that. We knew that coming into the season. We know that now going into this Cheez-It Bowl. Miami, to slow Oklahoma State down, you've got to slow down Tylan Wallace. Miami's offense, they took a major turn for the better when they hired Rhett Lashlee as their offensive coordinator. And of course, we can't give him all the credit. Getting the star transfer quarterback D'Eriq King from Houston gave this offense a huge boost too. King has over 2,500 passing yards on the year, 22 touchdowns, and just 5 interceptions, so does a great job of taking care of the football. Also has over 500 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns, so over 3,000 yards for D'Eriq King on the year. 26 touchdowns, just 5 interceptions. This guy's unreal. He's a major reason why Miami's the 18th ranked team in the country, a major reason they were in New Year's Six bowl contention up until just a few weeks ago. The Hurricanes are averaging 34 points per game. They're relatively balanced, 269.4 passing yards per game, 163.2 rushing yards per game, And you could talk about Cameron Harris and the run game for Miami. I want to focus more on the passing game because D'Eriq King does enough by himself with his legs, but he's got a great core of pass catchers led by Mike Harley, leading wide receiver with 730 yards and 6 touchdowns. And I really, really like their tight end in BREVIN Jordan, 480 yards and 5 touchdowns this year. The tight end for BREVIN Jordan, he is going to be another steal, I think, in this upcoming NFL draft. So all that being said, I focus so much on the Miami passing offense more so than their rushing offense because the passing offense might be how they win this game. You look at the defense for Oklahoma State. They're allowing 205.2 passing yards per game. And another kicker here, too, is that Oklahoma State has only forced 6 interceptions. So, relatively generous against the pass, more so than they are against the run. And they haven't done a great job of creating takeaways within their secondary. And that should be great for D'Eriq King. Great core of pass catchers. He doesn't give the ball away that much anyways, so he needs to have a big day through the air in this one if Miami wants to win this game. The Cowboys have allowed 265 passing yards in 3 of their last 4 games. That's another big number there. At least 265 passing yards in 3 of their last 4 games. One thing that the Cowboys do have going for them on their defense, though, is their pass rush. Pass rush has quietly been one of the better ones within the Big 12. Oklahoma State has 32 sacks on the year. That's huge. That's huge considering Miami's offensive line has remained very shaky, very mediocre or below average. Remember how bad they were last year. They've improved this year, but not by as much as they would have liked. 32 sacks for Oklahoma State. Miami has allowed 29 sacks this season. So that's the major storyline to watch. Can that front 7 for Oklahoma State continue to create pressure, make it a long day in the backfield for Miami and D'Eriq King? Or can Miami's offensive line show up? Final game of the year, give them your all, protect D'Eriq King, and allow him to make the plays, and maybe open up some lanes for Cameron Harris as well. You talk about that pass rush. You talk about that pass rush and how big it's going to be for Oklahoma State. Well, that's something that Miami has relied on all year long, and they unfortunately are going into this game without their top 2 pass rushers, JAELAN Phillips, QUINCY Roche, both deciding to opt out of this bowl game for the NFL draft. Look at these numbers, guys. Phillips and Roche have combined for 12.5 sacks this year. They have combined for 12.5 sacks for Miami this year. That is 44.6%. 44.6% of Miami's sacks this year. They have 12.5. The team as a whole had 28. So when you've got 2 players that have almost half of your sacks over the course of the entire year and they're not playing, your defensive line takes a major hit. Not just with your pass rush, but also with your run stuffing as well, with trying to clog the lanes and try to prevent guys like Desmond Jackson and LD Brown from breaking off some big runs and creating some big gains. So huge loss for Miami in this one, but we see this every year. It's happening more and more, and in a way, I don't know if you can really blame these athletes that, as they say, are playing in a meaningless bowl game as they get ready for the next stage of their career. Another key for Miami here, you look at more numbers for them. That's a huge loss and a major storyline to follow. Hurricanes are allowing 26 points per game. The key number I'm looking at for Miami right now is, yes, it's bad to lose your top 2 pass rushers. Obviously good in stopping the run. And that run number is the key. 180.6 rushing yards per game Miami is allowing right now. Maybe those numbers are a little bit skewed because they allowed 554 rushing yards in one game against North Carolina. But still, 180.6 rushing yards per game allowed. They've got to fix whatever went wrong against North Carolina, and they've got to fix it quick. Because if Oklahoma State can remain balanced, if they can use Jackson and Brown, run the ball at will, and that sets up some deep shots to Tylan Wallace, Miami does not stand a chance. So that rushing yard per game has to change. If you can hold Oklahoma State to, I say, 130, about 50 yards less, 130 rushing yards or less, Miami has a good chance to win this game. That's the key. You cannot allow the Cowboys to run wild on your defense. So you look at both of these numbers here, guys, and I think you know where we're going with the 2 keys to the game. The offenses, I would say right now, Miami has that slight edge defensively. I think Oklahoma State has that slight edge. And a lot of that is due in part to how poorly Miami played against North Carolina in that season finale. you wonder, is anything going to have changed in the last few weeks? Is Miami down on themselves? Where's their motivation? Top 2 defensive players are out. You didn't get to go to the Orange Bowl. You're playing in the Cheez-It Bowl, formerly known as the Camping World Bowl, I should add. A game's going to be played in Orlando. But will the motivation be there? Oklahoma State, they were playoff contenders. Will their motivation be there after falling well short, 7-3 on the year? So a lot of questions going into this one, and there are 2 major keys that will decide this game. The first is pass protection, as we mentioned. Pass protection. We mentioned some earlier numbers. Oklahoma State has 32 sacks on the year. Miami has allowed 29. And I look at what happened against North Carolina a few weeks ago for the Hurricanes. Miami allowed 3 sacks. They allowed 7 tackles for a loss. They allowed North Carolina to live in that backfield down in Miami on their home turf. They cannot allow that to happen again against, I say is an underrated Oklahoma State defense. Cannot allow that to happen. Oklahoma State, they've allowed 24 sacks. Remember that. Miami has 28, but you take away the 12.5, and you're looking at what? 15.5 sacks on the year? 15.5 sacks on the year because you're taking away the numbers that Phillips and Roche have put up. So, will Miami's pass rush get anything going? Will Spencer Sanders have all day in the pocket? Will D'Eriq King have all day in the pocket? And I know we have 2 dual-threat quarterbacks here to the point where if they get pressured, if the pocket collapses, both Sanders and King can escape and extend the play with their legs, buy themselves some more time, or just take off and run. But I will say that I believe D'Eriq King owns that mobility edge. I believe he is more effective on the ground than Spencer Sanders, and that is 1+ for Miami here if their offensive line does not hold up. Another key, run PTSD. What do we mean by that? It's a little bit of a play on words there. Run PTSD. Which rushing defense shows up for both the Cowboys and the Hurricanes? They desperately need some help up front. Oklahoma State against Baylor allowed just 70 rushing yards. That's great. That's awesome. But let's look at what happened before that. Baylor, unfortunately, has been very disappointing. Never really had the offensive capability to hang with some of the top teams within the Big 12. You look at what happened against TCU, a game that Oklahoma State lost. They allowed the Horned Frogs to rush for 236 yards. You look at the game prior to that, Texas Tech. Texas Tech, a team that dominates through the air. They had over 340 passing yards in that game. They also had 255 rushing yards in that game. So, yeah, you look at the Baylor game, if you're just looking at the last few, that looks great. But for the majority of the season, Oklahoma State's rushing defense has been pretty suspect. It has not been that great. And you wonder, are they going to be able to come into this game and shut down Cameron Harris? Again, I don't think he's the key in this game. I don't think he's the difference maker. I think the passing game is. But if Miami can find some balance there to set up the pass, they're going to be looking a lot better. Same goes for Miami here. They allowed 554 rushing yards to North Carolina. That's a horrible, horrible mark. But I will say that Desmond Jackson and L.D. Brown, they're not Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. That's not them. One horrible, horrible, horrendous defensive performance. But let's keep in mind that prior to the North Carolina game, in the prior 5 games, Miami had not allowed a 100-yard rusher. So they went 5 straight games without allowing a 100-yard rusher before they just collapsed against North Carolina. So we have to acknowledge what happened against the Tar Heels. We have to say that can't happen again, and obviously it can't. But for the most part, for the majority of the year, Miami was pretty stingy against the run. And I think there's a good chance we can see that the run defense return to form here against Oklahoma State, whose running game, yes, is averaging nearly 200 yards per game, but their best running back, Chuba Hubbard, will not be playing. So those are the keys that you need to look out for. Which quarterbacks are going to have time to throw, which front sevens, which defensive lines are going to be able to dominate, who wins the line of scrimmage, and then run defense. Which one shows up? Which one shows up? Number-wise, Oklahoma State owns that edge. But over the course of the entire year, you might say Miami owns that edge. It's the keys to look out for. So what's going to happen down in Orlando, guys? It's the former Camping World Bowl, now turned Cheez-It Bowl. And from that name, we hope we have a better matchup than the last 2. You know, a couple of years ago, we had TCU and Cal. That was a horrendous, 7-8 interception game. You had Washington State Air Force last year in the Cheez-It Bowl. That game was relatively low scoring, but a fun clash of styles. This one, again, has a great chance to be close, just like the previous two, but maybe a little bit more exciting, not nearly as boring and sloppy. This, to me, guys, is really the first bowl game we've talked about, and maybe the first bowl game all postseason that truly feels like a toss-up. One that could really go either way. It just depends on which Oklahoma State team shows up and certainly which Miami team shows up. Oklahoma State, we know, always good in the postseason. They usually play well in the postseason under Mike Gundy. But my key in this one, Oklahoma State has been wildly inconsistent over this last half of the season. Ever since they lost to Texas, they haven't been able to get it together. They have not been able to get it together. They have alternated wins and losses the last 7 weeks. You lose to Texas. You allow 44 points to Texas Tech. Sure, you annihilate Baylor, but you lost to TCU. You lost to Oklahoma in blowout fashion. We don't know which Oklahoma State team is going to show up. I want a team that's going to be a little bit more consistent. And believe it or not, I'm going to say that's Miami. Yeah, I know North Carolina, that game wasn't pretty. It was embarrassing. I know some of the wins before that weren't pretty. Weren't impressive. Maybe were closer than they should have been. But the Hurricanes come into this game playing a bowl game in their home state, and they know this is a must-win for them, especially since their last 2 bowl performances, blowout loss to Wisconsin in 2018, the shutout loss to Louisiana Tech last year. They know they need a better postseason performance. Manny Diaz knows he needs a better postseason performance and needs this win to cool off his seat a little bit going into 2021. And I think they find a way to win this game. Short-handed up front on the defensive line. I think D'Eriq King has a big game in this one. The Hurricanes get a late stop against this Cowboys offense. And Miami finishes the season 9-2 and carries some much-needed momentum into what, again, will be a huge 2021 season. So guys, thank you so much for watching us here at The Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, share our videos, and also make sure to check out everything down in that description below. We've got GE merchandise, Gridiron Expert merchandise. Check out the link for that. Check out our expert picks or against the spread picks for every single bowl game over on our website, thegridironexpert.com, as well as our newsletter, as well as our Patreon account, as well as our BetNow promo code offers, all those things down in the description to benefit you, the diehard college football fan. And once again, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on The Gridiron Expert.